Dia Dich Achara, hello my friend. I am inside the house today because both my little ones are sleeping and I'm the only one home. So I'm very excited today to share with you chapter 4. And I am wearing my Stories by Gilly t-shirt here that you can find at storiesbygilly.com. It's a great way to support me, and I have all kinds of sizes on there. They're print on demand and shipped to you. So without further ado, today is a little bit longer, 10 pages. So get comfy, get something to drink, a nice beverage, unless you're driving. Okay, 2 farewells. Orla and her mother arranged a fine burial after the wake, and practically the whole town was in attendance. Connor had earned a reputation for being a successful shepherd and an honest, friendly man, and the village was truly sorry to lose him. Since there were so many flowers in bloom, his grave was piled with more bouquets than Orla had ever seen in one place. The skies were brilliant blue, and butterflies hovered around the bouquets. Young children, ignorant of death, escaped their mothers and began a merry game of tag. Orla thought to herself that her father would have liked it if he were here to see his farewell, but it didn't suit her at all. She wanted silence and dark clouds, maybe even a downpour. After the ceremony ended, Ife didn't want to leave the grave, and Orla had no desire to go home, so they sat there together in silence until the sun began to set. Ife held her arm as they walked home. "Everything will be okay," she assured Orla, but Orla wasn't sure which one of them she was trying to convince. For the next year, the two women mourned and worked. Ife now had to do all the housework and farming alone, while Orla spent all her days with the sheep. Even though they were both strong and skilled workers, they couldn't accomplish everything they had done when Connor was alive, and they soon began to downsize the scale of their farming. This meant that they had just barely enough food for themselves and none to sell or trade in town for the other things they needed, like cloth and milk. They had to give up what few luxuries they had, like sugar, for their oatmeal. By winter, they had no choice but to start spending Orla's dowry. This was highly upsetting for Ife, but Orla didn't care. Orla was still hopeful that things would get better, but she was feeling rather lost since her father passed away. She no longer sang with Moira in the town, or even at home. She thought often of the stories her father used to tell her of wondrous beings and places, and she began to grow tired of the beautiful place she had always called home. She longed to leave, but had no plan and no means to make a journey. Anyway, her mother would say it was entirely inappropriate for an unmarried woman to set off on a journey alone. Before her father became sick, her life had been so unmarked by strife that Orla never really thought about death. Now she thought of it often, and it horrified her. To leave these green hills, the sun, everything she loved, only to lie in darkness for all eternity? Surely there were the stories of the splendors of the afterlife, but she couldn't be sure that those were anything but stories told by frightened mortals to ease their discomfort with death. She began to lose herself in long daydreams while tending the sheep, imagining an endless life with the fair folk. Things may have kept on in this way until Orla finally gave in and married the least annoying young suitor available, but one day a stranger came to town. He was a widower and had heard that there was a handsome widow in Ballyshannon with fair lush fields and a large flock of pale sheep. His name was Seamus Moore, and he was 49, but looked far older from years of scowling and spending time in the sun. He had straight red hair that he wore quite long, though it was thinning in the front. His beard was patchy, but his eyebrows were thick over his small, weirdly light gray eyes. Most offensive, though, were his awful teeth, which ranged in color from yellow to dark brown, except for 2 that were missing. However, he was tall and well-muscled, and had a reputation for having some skill as a farmer. So certain was he that Ife would accept his proposal that he had already sold his home and land, and had a small bit of gold from it. There was not really any courtship to speak of. He showed up one day and asked if he could trouble Ife for a drink of water. She invited him to sit by the hearth, and he told her how his own wife, God rest her soul, had died in childbirth a year since. He explained that after their son was born, his wife had had many miscarriages and stillbirths, which were a great trial to him, as the doctor had advised her to be on bed rest during her pregnancies, which never resulted in a living child for their trouble, after all that time with her not doing any work outside the house. He said that he was happy to have his son and did not want to bother with trying for any more children. Listening to this dreary tale of a woman's suffering told with no empathy made Orla dislike the ugly man even more. He was clearly self-centered and unfeeling for what his wife had gone through, and she hoped her mother would quickly send him on his way. However, Ife sat and listened attentively, and offered him bread with butter and jam. Seamus quickly got to the point and said that it had been a poor home to come to at the end of the day without a woman's touch, and that he would make her a fine husband if she was willing. To Orla's horror, Ife smiled. Though I do not know you well, I would be glad to have a partner again, so that I may run this land to its full potential and rebuild our savings for Orla's dowry. I would be glad to be your wife. Seamus went to seek lodging in town, as it would be improper to spend the night in their house before the wedding, and Orla rounded on her mother as soon as he was a few yards down the path. Mother, how could you? He's awful, and father is barely cold in his grave. Ife's face was stony. Listen to me, my love. Your father is gone, and you are nearly 18. It's high time you were married, and we don't have enough for a dowry. Without help, we'll never catch up. I had a good life with you and your father, but it's over now. You still have a chance at happiness, and I'm not going to let that slip away. You will accept this man as your new father and be grateful. Orla meant to answer back with something rude, but her throat tightened with tears, and she let out an exasperated sound instead, then stormed out the door, running toward the graveyard. As she sank down to the grass by the stone marker, she realized that she hadn't come here since the funeral, though she had meant to many times. What would he say to her if he was here? Probably to listen to her mother. He may have doted on her, but he was always honest and practical. Orla cried and sulked for an hour, but she had never been good at being idle. She soon stood up and made her way home. When she came into the cottage, her mother didn't look up from her cooking, and the two passed the evening in near silence, neither one of them wanting to think or talk about the future. A week later, Orla found herself wearing her best dress in the small chapel in town, witnessing her mother's marriage and trying not to think about her mother having to kiss him. That morning, Seamus's son Neil had arrived in town, and Seamus had announced that Neil would be living with them temporarily. Seamus had made arrangements to purchase the neighboring field to theirs, and planned to build another small cottage with Neil for Neil to live in. At the wedding breakfast, 36 of their family and closest friends celebrated the couple, though Orla suspected that they were there more to show their support of Ife than for true appreciation of the addition to their family. In town, Orla had heard people whispering about her mother, and knew they thought there was no way that her heart had let go of Connor in favor of this man. Seamus hadn't made the best impression on people during his short time in Ballyshannon. Some rumors had made their way to Orla that in his previous town he had angered the local available women by speaking in a disrespectful manner or being too forward, and that is why he had to seek a wife outside his village. She found these easy to believe and only hoped that his son had somehow turned out better than Seamus. In fact, watching him butter his scone while charming the ladies around him on the other side of the room, she thought that Neil was rather handsome. He had red hair like his father, but it was thick and cut short around a pleasant face with high cheekbones, blue-gray eyes, and a strong jaw. He was tall and well-muscled like his father, but in every other way he was an improvement. She thought for a moment of her father. He had the same broad shoulders. Just as she was thinking of stepping outside for some air, or possibly even making an excuse and going home, the music began, and she saw Neil make his way to her table. "Sister, come dance with me!" "Stepsister," she answered without a smile, but people were looking, and she knew it would be rude to turn him down when he hadn't actually done anything wrong. For a large man, he turned out to be a pretty nimble dancer. Orla happened to be a naturally gifted dancer as well, so the two of them made quite a good-looking pair on the dance floor. However, she didn't like how close he held her body to him, nor the way he looked at her, as if she were a rabbit and he a hungry wolf. When the party ended, Orla and her aunt stayed to clean up, while Neil lingered and drank with a few men who were in no hurry to get to the day's work. As she gathered up her things and made ready to start the walk home, Neil joined her. "We're going the same way, sister." "Oh, stepsister, ha." Orla sighed inwardly. She'd managed to forget for a while that he would be living with them until his house was built. She had thought of all the years that the cottage had been just her and her parents, and couldn't bear the thought of these two men living there, sitting in her father's chair, taking her father's place in her parents' bed. Ugh! But to be fair, her mother had married Seamus for convenience just as much as he had married Ife for her land, and it wasn't very kind or rational of her to dislike Neil just for being charming and handsome. Her father used to say that a charming man is like a pig in fine clothes, so maybe she was being a bit prejudiced due to that. Neil offered to carry the pile of table linen she was carrying, and they set off for home. "I have a lot of big plans, Orla, very big plans. Did you ever think about this, how this town doesn't have a proper inn? Once my house is built and I've bred a good-sized flock from your new lambs, I'll sell them for meat and build an inn in town. I also want to buy some good horses and breed them for sale. I've been to Dublin, and you wouldn't believe what fine carriages they have there, and horse racing as well. I wouldn't mind having my own racehorse." Good Lord, she thought, does he never shut up? I might as well not be here for all that he's asked me what I think about anything. As if he could read her mind, Neil suddenly paused his monologue and turned to her with what he must have thought was a roguishly dashing smile. "Give us a kiss then, sister." He leaned toward her with his thick pink lips puckered. "Oh, Neil, no thank you." Heart racing, she realized for the first time that she didn't have a chaperone. Her mother normally would never allow her to be unchaperoned, but she had already left with Seamus. Thankfully, Neil just laughed and did not press the issue. "Oh, now you're shy, and they told me you were the most bold lass in town. Why, I heard you used to get up and sing for everyone. Maybe you'll give me a song later, and then a kiss for your poor lonesome brother." Orla's stomach churned, but she was relieved. Soon they would be home, and surely he wouldn't bother her with her mother there. When they came home, there was much to do in setting up the cottage for 2 more people, finding homes for the few wedding gifts they had received, and making a simple supper. Soon everyone had gone to bed, and Orla thanked God that their house had been built with a separate small bedroom at the back, so she didn't have to hear them consummate the marriage. There was a small loft over the kitchen where she had slept since she was a child, and Neil was to sleep on a bedroll by the fire, as it was only a temporary arrangement. As she lay in bed, she thought of what her life would be like now. She missed her father so much it hurt, and it was hard to imagine things getting better with these new men in their lives. At first she wanted to cry, but the sadness was overtaken by anger. Why had her mother given up so easily? Did she really think this was better? How could this be all that life had to offer her? In such a beautiful world, with good people, why should they have to labor every day for these awful men? Feeling utterly trapped and overwhelmed, she crept from her bed, slipped on her shoes and a shawl, and stepped out into the night. It was a quarter moon and unseasonably warm for May. She sank to the ground beneath a gnarled old hawthorn tree and put her head in her hands. Taking deep breaths and listening to the quiet sounds of the nearby woods, she began to feel calm again. Then she heard the gentle creak of their cottage door opening. Looking up, she saw a large, darkened form that had to be Neil. He came striding toward her without a sound. Heart hammering, she quietly climbed onto a low branch of the hawthorn, then began looking for a higher one she could reach. But it was too late. He had seen her. In just a few long strides, he had closed the distance between them. "Good evening, my little bunny. Why, how you tremble. You must be just completely overwhelmed with desire, aren't you?" As nervous as she was, Orla couldn't help but choke out an abbreviated laugh. How could anyone be so delusional? Unfortunately, Neil was not offended by the laugh, and he smiled in a very self-satisfied way as he moved toward her. Though Orla had never fallen in love and was in no rush to be married, she was not an unromantic person. She dreamed of meeting someone who would fill her with butterflies and kiss her passionately. To give her first kiss to this unwanted stepbrother was an unwelcome outrage, and she wouldn't stand for it. But as she looked around for a higher branch to climb to, he already was hooking his arms under her arms and soon put her off balance, so that she had no choice but to fall forwards onto him. Her body slid down his chest, stomach, and hips before her feet touched the ground, and she recoiled from the firm pressure of his body. Neil grabbed her face and forced her to accept a long, wet, suffocating kiss. She began slapping his ears and neck, but he hardly seemed to notice. He didn't even bother to stop her, as his hands were engaged in finding a way under her layers of clothing. "What is wrong with you?" she cried as soon as he detached from her mouth to draw breath. "I don't want you. Let me go." "Oh, but you do," he murmured in a low voice. "I haven't met a single woman who didn't, and you're not anything special. You're just playing coy." Orla hadn't been in a fight since she was a small child, but she was stronger than she looked thanks to years of physical labor. She slammed the corner of her palm up and under his chin, while at the same time stomping on his bare foot with her shoe. He startled and backed off by a few inches, but she saw his face darken with rage. She could fight all she wanted, but she knew that she was at a great disadvantage just by her size, and that he could overpower her quickly. Just then she heard a growl. Out of the shadows of the woods, from the other side of the tree, came a huge and beautiful hound. The animal lunged toward them, but was clearly aiming for Neil. Before the hound could make contact, Neil dropped her and took off running for the north side of the clearing. The hound followed in close pursuit. Not taking any time to dwell on this strange development, Orla turned toward the cottage and ran. She knew Neil would likely not be killed by the dog, and would undoubtedly return before dawn. There was no way she could go on living here with that monster. She felt bad about leaving her mother, but after all, her mother had made her choice, and look where it had brought them. Back in the cottage, she quickly and silently gathered up a small bundle of bread, cheese, and a large old blanket. The blanket was her own, and the food was only a small portion, and she took no money, so she wasn't stealing much, but she still felt a little guilty for leaving without saying goodbye. So she paused in the clearing and whispered, "Slan a maher." And that's the end of chapter 4. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.